There's a particular kind of road in Dickenson County, Virginia that doesn't appear on any map made after 1970. Not because the road is gone, the road is still there, still passable in dry weather if you've got a truck with clearance, but because nobody who makes maps anymore has any reason to go looking for it. The county seat is Clintwood. The Dollar General is in Clintwood. The school, the courthouse, the Methodist church with the leaking roof that's been leaking since the Reagan administration, all in Clintwood. The roads that lead away from Clintwood, deeper into the creases of the mountain, are roads that lead to places people used to be and aren't anymore. Cracker's Neck Holler is one of those places. It sits at the end of 4 miles of switchbacking gravel that comes off Route 83 just past a rusted gate that's been standing open so long the weeds have grown up through the hinge. The holler itself is a narrow cut in the ridgeline, maybe 200 yards wide at its broadest point, pinched to almost nothing at the upper end where a spring-fed creek comes down through the rocks. There were families there once, 3 or 4 of them, back before the coal money came through and then left. The last house went to rot in the 1980s. All that's left now is the stone foundation of a barn, a few fence lines going back to wire and rust, and the mouth of the holler itself, the place where the road ends and the hollow opens up like a throat. And the woman in the white dress, standing at the mouth of it. She's been there as long as anyone can remember. Longer than anyone can remember if the older people in the county are being honest, which they generally are about things that scare them. The first time Paul Addington saw her, he was 17 years old and driving his father's truck home from a football game in Council. It was late October, cold enough that the fields along Route 83 had gone white with frost, and Paul had taken the long way home because there was a girl in the cab beside him and he wasn't ready for the night to end. Her name was Angela Ratliff, and she smelled like drugstore perfume, and he was hopelessly, painfully in love with her, the way only 17-year-olds can be, totally, and without any sense of self-preservation. He turned onto the gravel road on impulse. He'd been down it before, in daylight, on four-wheelers with his cousin. He told Angela there was an old barn at the end of it worth seeing, which was a lie, but she didn't know that and leaned forward in the seat the way girls do when they're willing to be taken somewhere they probably shouldn't go. The headlights swept the gravel and the dry autumn weeds on either side, and they were perhaps 200 yards from the mouth of the holler when Paul saw her. She was standing just at the point where the road ended and the ground opened into the hollow. Perfectly still, facing them. White dress that caught the headlights the way only white catches headlights, like she was generating light herself, like something behind her skin was faintly lit, dark hair hanging loose around her face. Her feet were bare on the frost-covered ground. Paul put his foot on the brake and stopped the truck. Angela said, "Who is that?" Paul said nothing. He sat very still with both hands on the wheel and looked at the woman in the headlights, and the woman looked back at him. Or he assumed she was looking back. Her face was in the headlight glare, and he couldn't quite make out her features, just the impression of a face, 2 dark places where the eyes should be, the pale oval of a chin. "Paul," Angela's voice had changed. "Back up. It's probably just back up the truck, Paul." He backed up. He did it without taking his eyes off the woman in the dress, watching her in the rear view as the truck reversed down the gravel, and she stood there the whole time without moving. When the road curved and the headlights swung away from her, she disappeared into the dark. He drove Angela home in silence. They never talked about what they saw. They stopped seeing each other a few weeks later, not because of that night exactly, but Paul always felt the night had something to do with it, the way certain experiences close something off between 2 people who share them. He didn't go back to Cracker's Neck Holler for 16 years. Paul Addington at 33 was a different animal than Paul Addington at 17. Divorced, 12 years as a Virginia state trooper, 6 of those in Dickenson County. 2 years out of the marriage and still living in the same county because leaving felt like losing, and Paul Addington had a hard time losing at anything. He knew about the woman at the mouth of the holler the way all longtime Dickenson County residents knew about her, as a piece of local color, a thing you mentioned to outsiders when you wanted to watch their faces. He'd driven past the turnoff to the gravel road 100 times without ever turning in. There had simply been no reason to. It wasn't his case. The woman in the dress had never hurt anyone, as far as anyone could establish. She stood there, and she was seen, and then she wasn't seen, and nobody could say with any certainty that she was there at all when you went looking with a flashlight. The reason Paul finally went back was not professional and not particularly rational. He went back because his mother asked him to. Doris Addington was 71 years old, born and raised in Dickenson County, and she was 3 months into a diagnosis that had a number attached to it, stage 4, the number that turns everything into a countdown. She'd gone quiet in the way people go quiet when they're working something out internally that they don't yet have words for. But one evening in late September, when Paul was sitting with her at the kitchen table after dinner, she put down her coffee cup and said, "I need you to go to Cracker's Neck and look at something for me." "Look at what?" "There's a stone at the mouth of the holler, on the left side of the road, under the bank. It's got something carved on it." She paused. "Your grandfather put it there. I need to know if it's still there." Paul looked at his mother. In 33 years, he had never heard her mention Cracker's Neck. He said, "You know about the woman." It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it like one. "Go look at the stone," she said, "then come back and we'll talk." He went the next afternoon, in daylight, in his own truck, off-duty. He drove the 4 miles of gravel with the windows down and the October air coming off the ridge smelling of turning leaves and wood smoke from somewhere distant. The road was rougher than he remembered. He hadn't been back since he was 17, but he recognized the way the land narrowed as he got deeper, the walls of the holler rising on either side until the strip of sky above the road was barely wider than the truck. The mouth of the holler was exactly as he remembered, except in daylight it looked like nothing, like the end of a road, which is what it was. The creek coming down through the rocks on the right, the remnants of the old fence line on the left, the ground going soft and wet where the spring drainage spread across what had once been a cleared yard. He parked and got out. Standing at the mouth in the afternoon light with birds moving in the canopy above him, he felt faintly ridiculous. He was a grown man and a law enforcement officer, and he had come to this particular patch of Dickenson County overgrowth because his dying mother had sent him to look at a rock. He found the stone under the bank, exactly where she'd said it would be. It was a flat piece of local sandstone about the size of a dinner plate, half buried in the leaf litter against the slope. Whoever had placed it had wedged it carefully into the base of the bank so that it stood nearly vertical, facing the road, facing the mouth of the holler. The carving on its face was worn but legible, a simple design, concentric diamonds inside a larger diamond, the kind of thing you'd find on the older grave markers in the county if you knew what you were looking for. Paul photographed it with his phone. He drove home and showed the photo to his mother. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "Good, it's still there." "What does it mean?" She was quiet for a moment. "It means your grandfather knew what was there, and he put something between it and the road." She looked up at Paul. He said it was enough, that as long as the stone faced the mouth, what was in the holler would stay in the holler. "What's in the holler, Mom?" She told him. The story, as Doris Addington knew it, had been passed down from her own mother, who had gotten it from the last family to live in Cracker's Neck before the coal money came and went. Their name was Sutherland, a large family, 6 or 7 children, who had worked a small farm at the upper end of the holler for 3 generations. Good people, by all accounts, church people. In the winter of 1931, the youngest Sutherland daughter went missing. Her name was Cora. She was 19 years old. She'd been to a dance in Clintwood the night before and walked home, a walk she'd made a dozen times, and in the morning her bed was empty and her shoes were by the door, and she was gone. They searched the holler and the surrounding ridges for a week. They found her on the 8th day, at the mouth of the holler, standing in the road in her white dance dress with her feet bare on the February ground. She was alive, but she was not right. She would not speak. She would not come inside. She stood at the mouth of the holler and looked out at the road, and when her family tried to bring her in, she fought them with a strength that didn't belong to a 19-year-old girl who'd been missing for 8 days in a Virginia February without food or shelter. They brought a doctor from Clintwood. He could find nothing physically wrong with her. Her feet, which should have been frostbitten beyond saving, were uninjured. She was not malnourished. She was not fevered. Her eyes tracked movement, and she responded to sound, and she was in every observable way a living and physically healthy young woman. But she would not go inside. She would not speak, and she would not move from the mouth of the holler. After 3 days of this, one of the older Sutherland boys rode to the far end of the county to fetch a woman that the family trusted with the kind of problems doctors couldn't fix: a root worker, a granny woman. In Dickenson County in 1931, you did not advertise that you'd called one, but you called one, because there were things the mountains did to people that medicine had no language for. The granny woman came and looked at Cora for a long time without touching her. Then she spoke to the family privately and told them what she believed had happened. Something lived at the upper end of the holler, she said. Something old that had been in that particular fold of the mountain before the Sutherlands, before anyone. It was not evil in the way that people use that word. It was not malicious, not cruel, not motivated by anything recognizable as human emotion. It was simply hungry, and it had learned over a very long time that the hollow drew people in the way still water draws deer. It fed on something the granny woman described in the idiom of her tradition as the part of a person that does the living, not the body, not quite the soul in the church sense, but the animating force, the thing that makes a person rather than a collection of working parts. Cora had walked past the mouth of the holler on her way home from the dance, and something had reached out and taken that part of her. What was standing in the road was the remainder, the body, the mechanism, still functioning but emptied of its essential occupant. It would stand at the mouth of the holler, the granny woman said, because that was where the thing that fed on it needed it to stand. It would stand there, and it would face the road, because it was being used as a lure. The thing in the holler was patient and old, and it had learned that what drew people in most reliably was not darkness or strangeness, but familiarity. A woman in a dress, someone who looked like someone you might know. The granny woman told the family what needed to be done. She told them to leave Cora where she stood and not to try to bring her back. She said what had been taken could not be restored. She told them to carve a stone and set it at the mouth of the road, facing in, and to leave the holler alone forever. The family argued. Cora's mother could not accept it. 2 of her brothers tried twice more to bring her inside. On the second attempt, one of them came away with 4 deep lacerations across his forearm that he could never account for and never spoke about again. They left Cracker's Neck the following spring, all of them. They took their furniture and their animals and their family Bible, and they left the hollow and Cora standing in it, and they did not go back. One of the sons, before he left, carved the stone and set it at the mouth of the road under the bank as the granny woman had instructed. Paul Addington's grandfather, passing through Dickenson County some years later, had found the stone toppled and reset it. That was the story.
Paul sat with it for 2 days. He was a rational man and a trained observer, and he did not believe in granny women or root work or hollow-dwelling entities that fed on the animating force of 19-year-old girls. He believed in evidence and documentation and the kind of truth that stood up in a county court. He also believed in his mother, who had 33 years of track record as a reliable narrator, and he believed in what he had seen at 17. The woman in the white dress, the bare feet on the frost, the way she had stood absolutely still in his headlights for the full minute it took him to back the truck down the road. On the 3rd day, he called his cousin Teddy, who had a forestry background and GPS equipment, and the kind of practical skepticism that Paul trusted, and he told him he wanted to go back to Cracker's Neck and look around. He did not tell Teddy everything his mother had told him. He said he was curious about the property history and wanted to see what was up there. Teddy said sure. Teddy said it like a man who has never been afraid of anything, which in Paul's experience meant he hadn't yet encountered the thing that would change that. They went on a Saturday in mid-October, 2 in the afternoon, full daylight. Teddy had his GPS unit and a surveying notebook. Paul had his service weapon, which he carried everywhere off-duty out of habit, and the photograph of the stone on his phone, and a feeling in his chest that he identified as professional caution, and that he knew, if he was being honest, was something else. The stone was where he'd seen it, still in place, still facing the mouth of the holler. Teddy photographed it and noted the GPS coordinates and wrote something in his notebook. Paul stood at the mouth of the holler and looked in. In daylight, in October, with the leaves down and the creek audible on the right, the holler looked like what it was, an abandoned piece of mountain real estate, overgrown and quiet, with the remnants of human habitation going slowly back to the soil. Paul could see the stone foundation of the old Sutherland barn from where he stood. He could see the fence line. He could see the creek. He could not see the upper end of the holler because the terrain curved to the left about 150 yards in, following the creek, and whatever was past that curve was not visible from where he stood. "I'm going to walk it," Teddy said. "No," Paul said. He looked at him. "We don't go past the stone," Paul said. He heard how it sounded. He held Teddy's look and didn't qualify it. Teddy was quiet for a moment, then he said, "All right." He said it in the tone of a man filing something away, rather than arguing about it. They spent an hour documenting the mouth of the holler from the road, photographs, GPS coordinates, measurements of the stone and its placement. Paul walked the road edge on both sides. He was not sure what he was looking for. He was looking the way you look when you don't have a category for what you expect to find. It was Teddy who found the second stone. It was on the right side of the road, buried deeper than the first, nearly invisible under 30 years of leaf litter and moss. A different stone, a piece of local shale, roughly triangular, about half the size of the sandstone carving. No carving on this one, but it had been placed deliberately, set upright, point down, wedged into the base of the bank in a way that mirrored the placement of the carved stone on the opposite side. "Two of them," Paul said. "One on each side," Teddy said, "like a gate." They stood at the mouth of the holler between the two stones, and Paul had a feeling he had not had since he was 17 in his father's truck, the feeling of being looked at from somewhere that the looking was not supposed to be possible. Not watched exactly, measured, the way you feel the weight of a scale. They went home before dark. Paul did not need to tell Teddy to do that. His mother asked him about it that evening. "The stone is there," Paul said. "Both of them." "Both?" She looked at him sharply. "There's only supposed to be one." Paul told her about the second stone. His mother was quiet for a long time after that, so long that he thought she'd drifted into the half-sleep that came over her sometimes in the evenings now, the medication doing its work. But then she spoke. "Your grandfather told me the granny woman said something else, something he didn't tell the family because he didn't think they needed to hear it." She paused. "She said the thing in the holler was patient, that it had been putting things at the mouth for a long time, not just Cora, before Cora, lures, things that would make people want to come in." She looked at Paul. "Your grandfather reset the carved stone because he thought it had fallen, but maybe it hadn't fallen. Maybe something had moved it." Paul thought about that. "If there are two stones," his mother said, "one on each side, and one of them isn't ours." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Paul went back to Cracker's Neck the next morning, alone, before dawn, which he knew was stupid and did anyway, because there was a thing in his chest now that wouldn't let him not go, the same thing that made him a good trooper, the inability to leave a question open once he'd started asking it. He drove in with the truck lights on and parked at the mouth of the holler and sat for a moment with the engine running. The carved stone was on the left side of the road. He could see it in the headlights. The shale stone that he and Teddy had found on the right side of the road was gone. Not toppled, not moved to one side. Gone.
The divot in the leaf litter where it had sat was there, the pressed-down depression of its triangular base still visible, but the stone itself was absent. Paul sat in the truck with both hands on the wheel and the engine running and looked at the mouth of the Holler in his headlights. He looked for a long time. The creek moved on the right side of the road. The trees stood. Nothing moved. But the carved stone on the left, his grandfather's stone, the stone facing the hollow, had been turned. It was still in its place under the bank, still wedged in the same angle, but where it had faced the mouth of the Holler, facing inward as the granny woman had instructed, it now faced the road. It faced out. Paul did not get out of the truck. He put it in reverse and backed down the 4 miles of gravel road to Route 83, and he drove to Clintwood, and he sat in the parking lot of the Dollar General until the sun came up and the world became ordinary again. He went to his mother's house that morning and sat with her and did not tell her what he'd found. He held her hand and they watched the morning news, and he thought about a woman in a white dress standing at the mouth of a road, facing out, drawing whatever came down that gravel toward her, toward the thing behind her that was old and patient and hungry, and he thought about the fact that the stone his grandfather had placed to hold that boundary in had been turned, and he did not know when, and he did not know by what, and he did not know whether the granny woman's working was in the stone's carving, or in its direction, or in both. He thought about all the cars that had driven past the Route 83 turnoff, all the people who had seen the rusted gates standing open, all the hunters and teenagers and curious strangers over 90 years who had turned down that gravel road and come back with a story about a woman in a white dress. All of them had come back. He thought about the ones who hadn't come back, the ones who weren't stories because there was no one left to tell them. He thought about Cora Sutherland, who had walked home from a dance in 1931 and whose bare feet were not frostbitten in a Virginia February, and who had fought her brothers with a strength that didn't belong to her, and who was left in the hollow by her family because a granny woman told them there was nothing left to save. He thought about the stone, turned to face the road. He drove to Clintwood Hardware that afternoon and bought a cold chisel and a mason's hammer and a piece of sandstone from the landscape supply bin out front, a flat piece, roughly dinner plate sized, and he drove back to Cracker's Neck Holler, and he recarved the design as best he could from the photograph on his phone, the concentric diamonds. He was not a craftsman, and the lines were rougher than his grandfather's, but they were there. He reset his stone facing inward next to the original, which he did not touch. 2 stones now on the left side, both facing in. He stood at the mouth of the Holler and looked up the road into the hollow, and he said, "I don't know if this does anything." He wasn't talking to himself. He knew that. He wasn't sure what he was talking to. He drove home. He didn't go back. His mother died in January. At the end, she asked him if the stone was there, and he told her yes, it was there, both of them, facing in. She seemed satisfied with that. She closed her eyes, and after a while her breathing changed, and then it stopped. Paul Addington still lives in Dickenson County. He left the state police the following year, not because of Cracker's Neck, he'll tell you, but the timing is what it is. He works for the county now, roads and bridges, which keeps him outdoors and keeps him busy and keeps him, most days, off Route 83. Most days. He drives past the turnoff sometimes. He doesn't slow down. He has never gone back to check on the stones, and he has made a decision which he holds to firmly not to. Questions are open for a reason. But he looks. Every time he drives past, he looks at the rusted gate standing open and the gravel road going back into the dark between the ridge lines. He has never seen her from Route 83. Not once, in all the times he's driven past. He doesn't know if that's because the stones are holding, or because she's learned not to stand where the road can see her.